topic is relations. Relation is the relationship between two or more sets of values. Let's suppose x and y are two sets of ordered pairs and set x is the relation with set y. Then the values of set x are called domain, whereas the values of set y are called range. So for example, there are some ordered pairs as 1, 2, minus 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, where the range is 1, 3, 5 and 7, and the domain is 2, 4, 6 and 8. Talk about the 8 main types of relation, which are equivalence relation, empty relation, transitive relation, symmetric relation, reflexive relation, inverse relation, identity relation, and the universal relation. So first there is empty relation, or we can say a void relation, in which an empty relation is one in which there is no relation between any elements of a set. So there is an example where if set A contains 1, 2 and 3, then one of the void relation can be R is equal to x and y, where mod of x minus y is equal to 8. For empty relation, R is equal to 5 is a set of A into B. A universal relation is a type of relation in which every element of a set A is related to each other. Consider set A, which contains A, B and C. Now, one of the universal relation will be R, in which there is x and y, where mod of x minus y is greater equal to 0. So, for universal relation, there is R is equal to A into A. And now we have to talk about the identity relation, in which identity relation, there is every element of a set is related to itself only. So for example, there is a set A in which there is A, B and C. So the identity relation will be I is equal to A, B, B and C, C. So for identity relation, we have to say that I is equal to A, belongs to capital. Now we have to talk about the inverse relation. Inverse relation is seen when the set has elements which are inverse pairs of another set. For example, if set A equal to A, B and C, D, then inverse relation will be R minus 1, which gets B, A and D, C. So for inverse relation, there is R minus 1, which equals to B, A and A such that A, B belongs to R. Now there is reflexive relation. So in reflexive relation, every element maps to itself. For example, consider a set A which has the elements 1, 2. Now an example of reflexive relation will be R, which equals to 1, 1, 2, 2, 1, 2 and 2, 1, where the reflexive relation is given by A, which belongs to R. Now there is symmetric relation. So in symmetric relation, if A is equal to B is true, then B is equal to A is also true. In other words, the relation R is symmetric only if B, A belongs to R is true when A, B belongs to R. So an example of symmetric relation will be R is equal to 1, 2, 2, 1. So the set of A is 1, 2. So it's the symmetric relation, which has A is a relation of B if B is a relation of A for all A, B belongs to A. So there is transitive relation. Transitive relation if x, y belongs to R and y, z belongs to R, then x, z should also belongs to R. So for transitive relation, if A is a relation of B and B is a relation of C, so we can say that A is also the relation of C for all A, B, C belongs to A. Now at last, we are going to talk about the equivalence relation. If the relation is reflexive, symmetric and transitive at the same time, it is known as the equivalence relation.
Hi, my name is Damon from First BSc TS, and I'm going to talk about binary relations. Binary relations are nothing but the association between one element to another element from a domain to a codomain. And I'll also give you some examples and I'll explain to you in detail.
When it comes to binary relations, there are different types of it. They are reflexive, symmetric, transitive, irreflexive and anti-symmetric. When it comes to reflexive binary relation, if A is equal to set A comma B, then R is reflexive if R is equal to A comma A and B comma B. A set is considered to be irreflexive if A comma A does not belong to R and B comma B does not belong to R. A set is considered to be symmetric if A comma B belong to R and B comma A also belongs to R. And a set is considered to be anti-symmetric if A comma B belongs to R and B comma A belongs to R, then A is equal to B. This concludes the set is anti-symmetric. If A comma B belongs to R and B comma C belongs to R, then A comma C also belongs to R. This concludes the set is transitive. Now let's look at a problem and try to categorize the different binary relations. Suppose set A is equal to 1, 2, 3, 4 and R is a relation on A such that R is equal to 1, 1, 1, 2, 2, 1, 2, 2, 3, 3 and 4, 4. Determine which of the 5 properties satisfied. When it comes to reflexive, yes, it is reflexive because 1, 1, 2, 2, 3, 3 and 4, 4 are all in the relation for all elements of set A. When it comes to irreflexive, no, it is not irreflexive because it does not contain A comma A. When it comes to symmetric, yes, it is symmetric because for every A comma B we have B comma A as seen with 1, 2 and 2, 1. When it comes to anti-symmetric, no, it's not anti-symmetric because while we have 1, 2 and 2, 1 does not equal to 2, so it's not anti-symmetric. When it comes to transitive, yes, it is because 1, 2 and 2, 1, then 1, 1. If 2, 1 and 2, 1, then 2, 2. All are in the relation. So this concludes its transitive.
Hello, I am Trishal Sastry of 1BSc DS. Now I will be talking about cardinality ratios. So what are cardinality ratios? A cardinality ratio is the number of relations between two objects or two sets. Cardinality ratios have multiple types. For example, 1:1, 1:many, many:1. Both 1:many and many:1 go hand in hand, but they're not similar. And then at last there's many:many. These are the base definitions. I will give you a more in-depth explanation about each example. Let's talk about 1:1 relations. 1:1 relations is a relation between an element of one set and one singular element of another set. Both of these are only singular elements, not many elements. Otherwise, it will be another type of relation. An example of 1:1 type of relation will be given right now. A good example for a 1:1 relationship would be you love them. Now, regardless of how convoluted your relationship may be, for example, you love them, but you broke up, and they have someone else. But they haven't moved on, and they seem lonely in that relationship. They're a murderer, but you still love them. It's still a 1:1 relationship because it's between you and them. The only criteria for a relationship to be a 1:1 relationship would be if one element, only one element, has a relationship with another only one element. Now that we dealt with 1:1 relations, let's jump into 1:many. 1:many relation means one element of one set has multiple relations with multiple elements of another set. Now I could also give an example of many:1 relation where many elements of one set have a relationship with. An example of 1:many relation would be between you and your entire blood relations. For example, you, your mother, father, brother, sister, uncle, aunt, grandparents, your great-grandparents, all until Adam and Eve. Another example would be John Wick hating everyone. Now let's talk about many relations. Many elements of one set have multiple relations with all the other elements of another set. For example, a good example of a many relation would be members of one sports team rivaling with members of another sports team. If one member of one team rivals with every other member of the opponent team, then the same applies to every other member in that team, and vice versa as well. So, Rivaling sports team is a good example of a many-to-many relation. Now this brings us to the end of cardinality of ratios. Once again, the cardinality of ratios is the number of relations between one element and another element of two different sets. Thank you.
n-ary diagrams or entity relationship diagrams are a conceptual model of the logical structure of a database. Now, relationship constraints are a part of n-ary diagrams. To understand a relationship constraint, it is imperative that we know what a relationship is. A relationship is nothing but the association between two or more entities. Now, to take into consideration, there are various factors that we need to consider in order to understand relationship constraint and how it comes about. For example, we have a degree of relationship constraint such as n-ary, binary, or ternary. What we shall be discussing in today's session is about participation constraints, which are one of the constraints under n-ary relations. Now, participation constraint specifies the minimum number of relations an entity needs to be part of to be considered under the relation set. For this matter, participation constraints are divided into two categories: total participation and partial participation, which we shall be discussing in today's session. So far, we have dealt with relationship constraints, which can broadly be classified into two: cardinality ratio and participation constraint. So a participation constraint is nothing but a constraint that specifies the minimum number of relationships that a particular entity can participate in. It is considered a constraint as that entity cannot be said to participate in the relationship if it does not fulfill the minimum number of relationships that it has to hold. Because of this reason, a participation constraint is also referred to as a minimum cardinality constraint, because it specifies the minimum number of relationships that an entity should take part in. Now, participation constraints can broadly be classified into two: total participation and partial participation. Total participation is basically when each entity in that particular set should compulsorily participate in at least one relationship instance. It is mandatory that one particular entity should participate in at least one relationship. Because of this, it is referred to as total participation or mandatory participation. Every entity should participate in at least one relationship set instance. That means that in total there will be total participation, because of which it is referred to as mandatory participation as well, because it is compulsory to participate. Now, this also implies that the number of relationships that every entity is involved in should be greater than 0. It cannot be equal to 0 or it cannot be less than 0. It has to be greater than 0, because then only will it fulfill the criteria that each entity in the entity set will have at least one relationship instance. Now, when we represent total participation in an n-ary diagram, we represent it using double lines. This is a block diagram which helps us understand. This is how it is represented in an n-ary diagram with two lines. Now, let us try to understand total participation with the help of an example. Here we can see that employee works for department. This basically means that for an employee to be considered as an employee under a particular company, he or she has to work for a particular department. It can be any department, but as long as they are not under a particular department, they cannot be considered as an entity of that particular organization. Take, for example, students itself. Every student is a part of a particular department. We are part of the data science department. Some other students might be part of the law department. Every student within the campus is under a particular department. And because of this can be termed as an example of total participation, because every entity is involved in at least one department. Secondly, we have partial participation. This basically states that an entity may or may not participate in the relationship instance. Note that here it is not mandatory for every entity in that particular set to be involved in a relationship instance, unlike total participation. Because of this reason, partial participation is also known as optional participation. The participation involved is partial and it is a may or may not case. Partial participation, when represented in an ER diagram, is represented using a single line between the entity set and the relationship set. The block diagram for the same helps us understand how it is to be visualized with a single line. Now let's try to understand partial participation better with an example. An employee can manage a department. Now, every employee cannot manage every department. A particular employee will be in charge of a particular department, because in most cases, of course, the number of employees will not be equal to the number of departments. Number of employees will be greater than the number of departments, because of which an employee from one particular department is chosen to manage that particular department. For example, we have a number of faculty, and among them we have an HOD. An HOD is one who manages and is the head of that particular department. At the same time, not all the faculty is managing a department. The HOD can be a faculty that manages a department, but all the faculties cannot be considered as HODs that manage that particular department or heads that particular department. In such a case, we can say that the participation is partial participation. We can also draw a relationship between cardinality and participation constraint. If the minimum cardinality is equal to 0, then it signifies partial participation, whereas minimum cardinality is equal to 1 signifies that the participation involved is total participation. Note how in the beginning we said that in the case of total participation, the number of minimum relationships will be greater than 0. When it is equal to 0, it is considered as partial participation, and when it is greater than 0 or equal to 1, it signifies total participation.
I am Jason Serafim from 1BSc-DSA, registration number 22112012. Today I am going to give an overview about the combinations of relations. The three major combinations of relation that I am going to talk about is union, intersection and subtraction, and with examples.
Now, we are going to talk about combinations of relations. In this, we are going to cover three types of combinations of relations: union, intersection, and subtraction. What are relations? Relations are sets, and therefore we can apply the usual set operating in them. For R1 equals to R2, both of them are from set A and B. So we can combine them to R1 union R2, R1 intersection R2, and R1 minus R2. Combination of relations. In each case, the result of the another relation from A to B. If we take one example here, A is equal to 1, 2, 3, B is equal to 1, 2, 3, 4. So we have to make a relation from R1 is equal to 1, 1, 2, 2, 3, 3, and R2 is equal to 1, 1, 1, 2, 1, 3, and 1, 4. So what the result is going to come for union. R1 union R2 is equal to 1, 1, 2, 2, 3, 3, 1, 2, 1, 3, and 1, 4. That is, all the elements from R1 and R2 are being in R1 union R2. If we go for R1 intersection R2, the common element from R1 and R2 is being noted, that is 1, 1. The other elements like 2, 2, 3, 3, 1, 1, 1, 2, 1, 3, and 1, 4 are not being included. If we go for R1 minus R2, the answer will be 2, 2, 3, 3, 1, 2, 1, 3, and 1, 4. The common element, that is 1, 1, is not being included.
Everyone, my name is Jay Sharma of 1BSc-TS. Today I would like to talk about n-ary relations. If you are here, you must be aware of its other properties such as combinations, cardinality, binary type, and its position constraints, and its definitions. I will mention the definitions again to hit the nail on the head.
Are an extension of the concept of binary relation to relate elements in n sets. An n-ary relation on sets A1 to An is a set of ordered n tuples where Ai is an element of Ai for all I. Thus, an n-ary relation on sets A1, An is a subset of Cartesian product A1 to An. Let you know its definitions clearly. We'll move on to some examples. Example 1. Let A be a set of names, A2 a set of addresses, and A3 a set of telephone numbers. Then a set of 3 tuples, name, address, and telephone numbers. We have it. For example, Trishal, he lives in Celebration Lavazza, and his phone number is this. Similarly with the other two. It's a 3-array relation, or ternary, over A1, A2, and A3. For second example, let A1 be a set of names, and a set of 1 tuple such as Amy, Barbara, and Charles is a 1-array relation, or a unary relation, over A1. A unary relation represents a property, characteristics such as tall, rich, etc. of relationship types. Attributes from 1:1 or 1:n relationships can be migrated to the one of the entity types that participates. In 1:1 relationship type, attributes can be migrated to either of the entities. I'll show you how. In 1:1 relationship types, attributes of this relationship type can be migrated to either the employee entity or to the department entity, either of one of the entities. In 1:n or n:1 relationship type, attributes are migrated only to the entity types on n side. In this, attribute of this relationship can be only migrated to the n side of the relationship. In m:n relationship type, some attributes can be determined by combinations of participating entities.